The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal chandeliers, cascading white hydrangeas, and soft, expensive music that drifted like a dream through the air. It was the annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital of Chicago, an evening where the city's elite gathered to sip vintage champagne, network under the guise of philanthropy, and make grand donations designed to secure prominent placement on the Morning Society pages. At a quiet, secluded table near the back sat Arthur Sterling. At 42, Arthur was a titan in the corporate world, the ruthless, untouchable CEO of Sterling Global Capital. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his sharp, angular face was set in the familiar, guarded expression of a man who trusted spreadsheets far more than human beings. He had built his multi-billion-dollar empire on a cold, unyielding philosophy. Everything and everyone has a price, and weakness is a liability. He didn't want to be here tonight. His public relations director had practically dragged him by the collar, insisting that a reclusive billionaire bachelor needed to show face for the cameras. Arthur took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch, his cold eyes scanning the crowded room with absolute detachment. Wealth, power, success, he had conquered them all. Yet tonight, surrounded by successful couples laughing and celebrating family, a heavy, hollow ache settled deep in his chest. It was a familiar ghost, a quiet reminder of the empty penthouse he returned to every single night. Suddenly, the live band shifted its tempo. The pianist struck a soft, poignant chord, and the master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, his polished voice echoing smoothly through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite all fathers and their little princesses to the dance floor for our most cherished evening tradition. Across the room, a wave of motion began. Proud fathers stood up, beaming with joy, taking the small hands of their young daughters. Giggles, sparkling party dresses, and ribbons filled the center of the mahogany floor as the first gentle notes of a father-daughter waltz began to play. Arthur looked away, his jaw tightening into a hard line as a bitter knot twisted in his stomach. He set his glass down a little too hard on the table. A performance, he thought cynically. Just another corporate-sponsored display of artificial happiness. He reached for his smartphone, eager to bury himself in work emails and escape the sentimentality of the room. But before his thumb could tap the screen, a tiny motion at the edge of his vision made him freeze. Standing just a few feet away from his table, half hidden behind a towering floral arrangement of white roses, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She wore a frilly, pale pink party dress with a velvet sash, but the fabric was slightly rumpled, as if it had been worn through a very long, tiring day. In her hair, a silver glitter tiara sat slightly crooked, caught on a stray curl. She wasn't dancing. She was standing completely still, her small hands clutching the strap of a miniature sequin purse so tightly her knuckles were stark white. Her big, dark eyes were wide and swimming with unshed tears, staring out at the sea of twirling fathers and daughters in the center of the room. Arthur watched her, his professional instincts kicking in with mild curiosity. Where are her parents? Hotel security should be keeping an eye on the perimeter. He looked around the room, expecting to see a frantic mother or a distracted father searching through the crowd. But no one was looking at her. In a room full of the city's most powerful and influential people, she was entirely invisible. Slowly, the little girl turned her head, and her tear-filled eyes locked directly onto Arthur. She didn't look away. Instead, with the raw, unfiltered courage only a 6-year-old possesses, she took 2 hesitant steps forward, walked right up to the billionaire's exclusive corner table, and stopped just beside his chair. Arthur stared down at her, completely disarmed. In his world, people approached him with tailored pitches, nervous handshakes, or calculated business smiles. No one ever approached him like this. The little girl sniffled, wiping a stray tear from her cheek with the back of her small hand. Her lip trembled violently. "Excuse me, mister," she whispered, her voice tiny and cracking under the weight of a heartbreak too heavy for someone her age. Arthur cleared his throat, his usual commanding corporate voice unexpectedly catching in his windpipe. "Yes? Are you lost, sweetheart?" Where are your parents? The little girl looked down at her shiny black patent leather shoes, fighting back a fresh wave of sobs. My mommy brought me, she whispered softly, pointing a small finger toward a distant registration desk near the entrance, where a tired-looking woman in a volunteer badge was frantically answering phone calls. She's working the front desk. She had to check people in. She promised she'd be done by 7. The child took a ragged breath, looking back up at Arthur, and delivered words that pierced straight through the billionaire's armored heart like a glass shard. It's the father-daughter dance, and I'm alone. The music in the ballroom seemed to fade into a hollow, distant hum. Arthur felt the breath completely leave his lungs. The corporate towers, the millions in the bank, the ruthless boardrooms, the suits, the status. In that single microsecond, it all dissolved into absolute nothingness. He looked at the little girl's crooked tiara. He looked at her waiting, trembling hands. And deep inside his soul, a long-forgotten memory detonated. He was 6 years old again, standing in a school auditorium, waiting by the gym door for a father who had promised to show up for the school play. A father whose briefcase was always more important than his son. He remembered the burning shame, the crushing loneliness, and the vow he had made to himself as a boy. Never let anyone feel that small. Arthur didn't think. He didn't calculate the optics. He didn't care that half the CEOs in Chicago were watching his table. Slowly, deliberately, Arthur Sterling pushed his chair back. He stood up to his full 6'2" height. With steady, calm hands, the ruthless billionaire reached up and adjusted the cuffs of his expensive tuxedo jacket. Then, he looked down at the little girl, his cold, guarded eyes transforming completely, melting into a warm, gentle gaze that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. He knelt down on one knee right onto the plush carpet, putting himself entirely at her eye level, ignoring the dust and the expensive fabric of his trousers. "What's your name, princess?" Arthur asked, his voice thick with an unexpected, profound tenderness. The little girl blinked, surprised by the sudden kindness. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily?" Arthur repeated, a genuine, radiant smile breaking across his weathered face. "That is a beautiful name. My name is Arthur." He extended his large, warm hand, palm upward, offering it to her like a bridge across an impossible chasm. "I have a confession to make, Lily," Arthur said softly, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm sitting over there all by myself, and I don't know how to dance to this song. Do you think a wonderful young lady like you would be willing to teach an old guy like me?" Lily's eyes widened. The tears stopped, replaced by a sudden, brilliant spark of pure, unadulterated magic. A breathless, watery smile spread across her face. The little girl looked down at his big hand, and then slipped her tiny, fragile fingers right into his palm. "Okay," she whispered, nodding eagerly. Arthur gently stood up, lifting her effortlessly into a brief twirl before setting her down on the edge of the dance floor. Without a single hesitation, the billionaire titan of Wall Street wrapped his arms around the 6-year-old girl, pulling her close against his chest. He didn't care about the cameras flashing from the society pages. He didn't care about the gasps of absolute shock rippling through the surrounding tables as Chicago's most feared CEO stepped onto the dance floor with a volunteer's daughter. As the gentle waltz swelled around them, Arthur closed his eyes and began to sway to the music, taking slow, deliberate steps so Lily's small patent leather shoes could stand safely on top of his polished leather loafers. Lily rested her small head against Arthur's expensive tuxedo jacket, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. For the first time in 30 years, Arthur Sterling didn't feel empty. As the music played on under the glittering chandeliers, the billionaire realized a profound and life-altering truth. True wealth wasn't measured by what you accumulated in a vault, but by the warmth you brought to a lonely heart. And as a tear finally slipped down Arthur's cheek and landed softly in Lily's hair, the coldest man in Chicago was finally, beautifully healed.